She was the most famous woman in the world. And then, on a July morning over the central Pacific Ocean, she was simply gone. No wreckage, no confirmed body, no final transmission that made any sense. Just a voice crackling through a radio receiver, confused, searching, running low on fuel, and then nothing. An ocean so vast, it could swallow every answer whole. Amelia Earhart disappeared on July 2nd, 1937. The search that followed was the largest air and sea operation in United States naval history at that time. 16 vessels, 65 aircraft, 10 days. Over 250,000 square miles of open ocean combed and recombed until the Navy quietly, reluctantly gave up. They found nothing. She was 40 years old. She was 9 days away from completing an around-the-world flight that no one, man or woman, had ever attempted along the equatorial route. She was, by any measure, the most celebrated aviator alive, and the Pacific took her like she was nobody. That is the fact. Everything else, every theory, every expedition, every classified document request and coral reef dive and government conspiracy is the world's desperate attempt to make sense of a silence it was never prepared for. To understand what happened on that final morning, you have to understand who Amelia Earhart actually was. Not the icon, not the symbol, the woman. She was born in Atchison, Kansas in 1897. By her own description, she was not a natural pilot, she was a determined one. She took her first flying lesson in 1921, saved money working as a truck driver and photographer to pay for it, and soloed after just 2.5 hours of instruction. She bought her first plane, a second-hand Kinner Airster biplane she named the Canary, at the age of 24. In 1928, she became the first woman to cross the Atlantic by air as a passenger, something she was embarrassingly honest about. She called herself a sack of potatoes on that flight, there for publicity while the men did the flying. It gnawed at her. 4 years later, she went back and did it herself, solo, in the dark, in fog and ice, in 14 hours and 56 minutes. She landed in a field in Northern Ireland. A farmer walked over and she told him she'd come from America. He didn't believe her. She set records consistently and methodically. Altitude records, speed records, distance records, with the same quiet intensity she brought to everything. She wrote books. She designed luggage and clothing lines. She lectured at Purdue University. She advised women, relentlessly and publicly, to ignore the limits placed on them by a world that hadn't yet caught up to their ambition. And then she decided to circle the globe. By 1937, 2 around-the-world flights had already been completed, but both had followed northern routes using shorter overwater legs. Earhart wanted to fly the equator, 29,000 miles, the longest, most dangerous route possible. She called it her last great flight. She said she had one more long flight left in her and she wanted it to mean something. Her aircraft was a Lockheed Electra 10E, a twin-engine aluminum beauty she called her flying laboratory. Her navigator was Fred Noonan, one of the most experienced oceanic navigators in the world, a Pan American Airways veteran who had helped chart the first trans-Pacific airline routes. He was 44 years old. He had a drinking problem, something that would be quietly noted in the aftermath, but never used to explain what happened. They began the journey in June 1937, flying east from Oakland, California. By late June, they had crossed North America, the Atlantic, Africa, India, Southeast Asia, and Australia. They were, by most estimates, 22,000 miles into the trip. The last major leg, from Lae, New Guinea to Howland Island, was the most dangerous, 2,556 miles of open ocean, with the destination barely visible from the air. Howland Island is a flat, narrow strip of coral and sand in the central Pacific, 2 miles long, half a mile wide. Finding it required near-perfect navigation. The U.S. Coast Guard cutter Itasca was stationed at Howland, specifically to guide Earhart in by radio. It was July 2nd. The Electra took off from Lae at midnight local time, heavily loaded with fuel. Earhart and Noonan had approximately 20 hours of flying ahead of them. What happened in those 20 hours is the core of everything. Communications with the Itasca began that morning. The radio contact was troubled from the start. Earhart and the Itasca were operating on different frequencies, miscoordinated in ways that were later described as a cascade of small failures rather than any single catastrophic mistake. The Itasca could hear Earhart. Earhart could not clearly hear the Itasca. She was waiting for homing signals that weren't reaching her. The Itasca was sending transmissions she wasn't picking up. By 7:42 a.m., her voice came through clearly enough for operators to transcribe. She reported that fuel was running low and they could not see land. She gave their position as 200 miles out. She asked the Itasca to take bearings on her signal. At 8:43 a.m., the final confirmed transmission, she reported that they were running north and south, searching, and that the Itasca's signal was weak. Her voice was described by the operators on board as strained and high, like someone trying to hold it together. After that, nothing. The Itasca sent up a column of black smoke from its funnels to help her spot them visually. Nobody saw the Electra. Nobody saw a crash. The sky was clear. The ocean was calm. And somewhere above that ocean, Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan ran out of options. The official conclusion is that they ran out of fuel, ditched in the ocean, and sank. It is the most logical explanation. It is supported by the navigation errors, the radio failures, and the silence that followed. The ocean at that location is more than 17,000 feet deep in places. An aircraft that went down there would be gone forever. But the world has never accepted gone forever as an answer for Amelia Earhart. The theories began almost immediately. By 1943, a Hollywood film suggested, without evidence, that she had been captured by the Japanese and executed as a spy. The theory persisted for decades, bolstered by a photograph discovered in the 1930s-era archives of the US National Archives in 2017. The photograph appeared to show two Caucasian figures, a man and a woman, on a dock in the Marshall Islands. Researchers claimed the figures were Earhart and Noonan. Within days, a Japanese military blogger pointed out that the photograph had been published in a Japanese travel book in 1935, 2 years before the disappearance. The theory collapsed. Then there's the Nikumaroro hypothesis. Nikumaroro, formerly known as Gardner Island, is an uninhabited atoll 350 miles southeast of Howland Island. The International Group for Historic Aircraft Recovery, known as TIGAR, has mounted 13 expeditions to the island since 1989, building a case that Earhart and Noonan didn't crash at sea. Instead, they argue, the pair landed on the island's flat reef, survived for some period as castaways, and eventually died there. The evidence TIGAR has assembled is compelling in pieces and maddeningly incomplete as a whole. A partial skeleton discovered on the island in 1940 was examined by a physician who initially estimated it belonged to a short, stocky male. The bones were later lost, a staggering failure of record-keeping, but a 1998 forensic reanalysis of the original measurements found them more consistent with a tall woman of Northern European descent, consistent with Earhart, not confirmed, consistent. Other finds on Nikumaroro include fragments of aluminum sheet that may match the Electra's hull specifications, remnants of a woman's shoe of a type and size Earhart wore, a piece of plexiglass consistent with the aircraft's windows, and what researchers believe are the remains of a campfire site near the water's edge. In 2019, a bone fragment was found on the island. DNA analysis is ongoing, though decades of tropical exposure have severely degraded any genetic material. Radio researchers have also assembled a database of distress signals logged by amateur and commercial radio operators in the days following the disappearance. Some of those signals, heard across the Pacific and as far away as Texas, appear to contain consistent content. A female voice, a failing battery, a reference to a man who was injured and couldn't help. Whether any of these signals came from Earhart on a wrecked but functioning aircraft has never been confirmed, but they haven't been dismissed either. The US government classified significant amounts of documentation surrounding the disappearance and the subsequent search. Some of those documents were declassified decades later and revealed little. Others remain unavailable. Whether there is anything meaningful in those files, evidence of a cover-up, a communication intercept, intelligence about what actually happened, is something that historians have argued over for 80 years without resolution. What is not in dispute is the scale of what was lost. Earhart had become something larger than an aviator. In a decade defined by economic depression and rising fascism, at a time when women's professional ambitions were aggressively policed by culture, law, and expectation, she had walked out onto airfields and simply refused to accept limitation. She flew farther, higher, and faster than anyone said she should. She did it with a kind of calm that infuriated the people who needed her to fail and electrified the people who needed someone to prove it could be done. Women wrote her letters by the thousands. Young girls pinned her photograph to their walls. Her endorsements sold products, but more than that, her existence sold a possibility, a version of American life in which what you could do mattered more than who you were expected to be. When she vanished, the grief was genuine and it was national. Franklin Roosevelt authorized the Navy search personally. Her husband, publisher George Putnam, spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on private search efforts. The world did not want to let her go, and it never really has. The expeditions continue, the theories multiply. Every few years, a new piece of evidence surfaces, a bone fragment, a photograph, a signal log, and the world briefly holds its breath, leaning toward an answer. And then the answer dissolves, and the Pacific goes quiet again, and Amelia Earhart remains exactly where she has been for nearly 90 years, missing. There is something particular about this disappearance. Something that sets it apart from other unsolved mysteries of the 20th century. It isn't just that she was famous, it isn't just the circumstances, it's the nature of who she was and what she was doing when the silence came. She was alone, or nearly alone, over the largest ocean on Earth in a small aircraft, doing something extraordinary, pushing past every boundary that had ever been drawn around her. And in that moment, at the absolute limit of human courage and human capability, something went wrong. Something small or something catastrophic, a fuel miscalculation, a navigation error, a mechanical failure, a piece of bad luck the size of a radio frequency mismatch, and she was gone. She never made it to Howland Island, she never came home, but she got farther than anyone said she would. She always did. The Pacific is enormous, and it is patient, and it keeps what it takes. Somewhere out there, in 17,000 feet of black water, or on a coral atoll where the crabs have long since scattered whatever was left, or in a classified folder that no one alive has read, is the final answer to what happened to Amelia Earhart. We have been looking for it for nearly 90 years. We are still looking, and every time we look, we are reminded of something she once wrote, that the most difficult thing is the decision to act. The rest is merely tenacity. She acted, she flew, she pushed the Electra east over the dark Pacific, and she did not turn back. The ocean may have taken her body, but it never took that. Some silences are not endings. Some silences are what courage sounds like, when the radio finally goes quiet and the sky is clear, and the only thing left is what someone chose to do with the time they had. Amelia Earhart chose to fly. Right to the very last second, she flew.